Belarus has two of Europe's most beautiful Renaissance castles, Mir and Nesvij, both World Heritage Sites, preserving 1,000 years of Slavic, Lithuanian and Polish history on its soil. But today, the United Nations Special Rapporteur describes Belarus as a country that has closed independent civic space and effectively deprived people in Belarus of their ability to exercise their fundamental freedoms. Belarus has won 33 Olympic gold medals, one of the highest per capita rates in the world, with athletes celebrated in every village. But today, three-time Olympic medalist Herasimenia lives in exile in Lithuania, prosecuted in absentia for her civic stance. Olympic athletes are jailed or banned for refusing to support the regime. Belarus's constitution promises freedom of speech, assembly and association. The country has the longest unfortified border in Europe, a symbol of openness and trust. But today, since the disputed 2020 presidential election, hundreds of thousands of Belarusians have fled, and the United Nations confirms over 1,400 political prisoners remain behind bars. 3 Belarusian voices became known to the world only after they were forced to flee. Tsikhanouskaya, a former English teacher who became a presidential candidate in 2020 after her husband was jailed, was forced into exile in Lithuania within days of the election under threat of arrest, and now leads the Belarusian opposition from Vilnius. Komissarenko, one of Belarus's most popular stand-up comedians, left in early 2021 because of his satirical monologues about Lukashenko and continues performing across Europe to packed halls of Belarusian diaspora. Herasimenia, three-time Olympic medalist in swimming and head of the Belarusian Sport Solidarity Foundation, fled to Lithuania after openly opposing the regime's crackdown on athletes. Today, we tell you why hundreds of thousands more had to flee too. You're watching the Human Rights Expert Witness channel. We are country expert witnesses based in London. We write expert reports for immigration tribunals in the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, and the European Union. For this episode, we have reviewed several Belarusian asylum cases, all anonymised. A young man who refused to repress protesters as a riot police officer and fled the country. A woman whose participation in a single August 2020 rally led to her arrest and prosecution 5 years later. A journalist whose Telegram channel was declared extremist material. A human rights lawyer disbarred for defending political detainees. A teacher dismissed for refusing to falsify election protocols. A gay, lesbian or transgender person whose social media post led to a search of their home. A schoolboy detained at 15 for displaying a white, red, white flag. Today, we walk through every one of those reasons. If you are looking for a country expert witness, our verified list of qualified experts is linked in the description below. Modern Belarus begins in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed. Belarus declared independence. The country had nuclear weapons, a strong industrial economy, and a population of around 10 million. In 1994, the first presidential election was held. A young, populist former director of a state collective farm named Alexander Lukashenko won. He has stayed in power ever since, more than 30 years, longer than any other leader in Europe. Through the 2000s, the space for opposition closed slowly. Independent newspapers were banned. Opposition politicians disappeared, the most famous case being Viktor Hanchar and Yuri Zakaranka, who vanished without trace in 1999. Belarus retained the death penalty, the only country in Europe that still executes prisoners by gunshot to the back of the head. In 2010, a presidential election ended with mass protests on October Square in Minsk. 7 of the 9 opposition candidates were arrested on election night. Hundreds were imprisoned. The European Union imposed sanctions for the first time. In August 2020, the next election happened, and everything changed. The official results gave Lukashenko 80% of the vote. The opposition candidate, Tsikhanouskaya, was declared to have received only 10%. Almost no one believed it. The protests that followed were the largest in the country's history. Hundreds of thousands of people on the streets of every major city. The response was brutal. Riot police, known as OMON, beat, arrested, tortured. Over 35,000 people were detained in the first 3 months. Multiple died in custody. Tsikhanouskaya was forced into exile in Lithuania within days. Many of her campaign team were jailed for over a decade.
Since 1st of May 2020 has closed independent civic space and effectively deprived people in Belarus of their ability to exercise these rights.
In 2022, Russia launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine from Belarusian territory. Belarus became, in the words of the United Nations, an active state sponsor of the Russian aggression. New sanctions followed. The trickle of political prisoners became a flood. In October 2024, the United Nations Human Rights Council took an extraordinary step. It created a group of independent experts on Belarus, headed by Moskalenko, replacing the previous Special Rapporteur mandate with a stronger investigative body. The group's first full report, presented in March 2025, used language never before used about Belarus. The group concluded that the government of Belarus has committed widespread human rights violations against the country's civilian population, some amounting to crimes against humanity as part of the brutal efforts to quash all opposition.
The government of Belarus has committed widespread human rights violations against the country's civilian population, some amounting to crimes against humanity, as part of the brutal efforts to quash all opposition to the rule of President Alexander Lukashenko.
In September 2025, the group reaffirmed and expanded its finding.
We have determined that some of these violations constitute crimes against humanity, specifically political persecution and imprisonment.
Confirming these violations constitute crimes against humanity, specifically political persecution. And this is where we are today. Now we will show you who is in danger. If you are in Belarus and you belong to any of these groups, you may be at risk. 1. Political opposition. Anyone who supported the Tsikhanouskaya campaign or any other opposition movement. 2. Protesters from 2020 and after. Even those who walked past a demonstration. Even those who only liked a Telegram post. 3. Journalists, bloggers, media workers, including foreign agent designations and extremist designations for whole outlets. 4. Human rights defenders, including Vyasna, the country's oldest human rights group, banned as extremist. 5. Lawyers who defended political cases. Hundreds have been disbarred and several criminally prosecuted. 6. Gay, lesbian and transgender Belarusians. Same-sex relations face increasing legal pressure and societal violence. 7. Religious minorities, including unregistered Protestant churches and Jehovah's Witnesses. 8. Military and police officers who refused unlawful orders, including former OMON officers who defected. 9. Artists, comedians, musicians, athletes. Anyone with a public profile and a critical voice. 10. Teachers, civil servants, election commission members who refused to falsify results. 11. Family members of exiled critics. Hostages used to pressure those abroad to return or be silent. 12. Belarusian Ukrainians and Belarusians of Polish, Lithuanian or other minority heritage facing forced assimilation. If you recognize yourself in this list, keep watching. If you are in a similar situation, you can find a list of country expert reports for Belarus on our website. You can use them as evidence in your asylum claim. You can also find a verified list of country expert witnesses on Belarus, link in the description. Now, let us look at the 5 main reasons people flee Belarus today. On the 9th of August 2020, Belarusians went to vote in what they expected to be a routine presidential election. They got instead the largest civic mobilization in the country's history. Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, an ordinary English teacher and mother of 2, ran in place of her husband Serhiy Tsikhanouski, an opposition blogger who had been arrested. She partnered with Maria Kolesnikova and Veronika Tsapkala in a women-led campaign. Tens of thousands attended their rallies. The official results gave Tsikhanouskaya only 10%. The streets responded. Within 48 hours of the election, Tsikhanouskaya was forced to flee to Lithuania under direct threat. Maria Kolesnikova refused to leave. She was abducted, driven to the Ukrainian border in September 2020, and tore up her passport in the back of the van to prevent her deportation. She was then sentenced to 11 years in prison. Mikolai Statkovich, the veteran opposition leader, refused all amnesties and remains in detention. The crackdown continues. The United Nations confirms over 1,400 political prisoners remain behind bars as of 2025. Tsikhanouskaya leads the United Transitional Cabinet of Belarus from Vilnius and has been sentenced in absentia to 15 years in prison. Kolesnikova has been held incommunicado for long periods. Statkovich has spent over 12 years total in detention across his career and has refused all forced exile offers.
According to human rights defenders, there are now 1,409 political prisoners in Belarus. New searches, arbitrary detentions and seizure of property occur on a daily basis.
Thousands of Belarusians have been arrested and arbitrarily detained for exercising their rights to freedom of expression, opinion, assembly, and association.
Belarus is now ranked 167th in the world in press freedom, close to last place in Europe, ahead only of Russia. The methods are well developed. In May 2021, the authorities raided Tut.by, the largest independent news portal in Belarus, with millions of daily readers. The entire newsroom was arrested. Most of the senior editors received sentences of 5 to 12 years. The site was declared extremist material, which means even reading or quoting it can lead to criminal charges. Independent outlets that survived, Zakalo, Belsat, Radio Liberty Belarus Service, Nasha Niva, Reform.by, all now operate from outside Belarus. Most are based in Warsaw, Vilnius and Kiev. Their journalists face in absentia prosecutions and asset freezes inside Belarus. And it is not only journalists. Belarus prosecutes anyone with a microphone. Slava Komissarenko, one of the country's most popular stand-up comedians, left in early 2021 after his satirical monologues about Lukashenko led to direct threats. He continues performing across Europe to packed halls of Belarusian diaspora. His videos getting tens of millions of views. Marina Zolotava, editor-in-chief of Tut.by, was sentenced to 12 years in prison after the May 2021 raid. Andrzej Poczobut, Polish-Belarusian journalist and member of the Polish minority, was sentenced to 8 years in 2023. Over 33 media workers are currently behind bars. Over 250 outlets and organizations have been designated extremist since 2021, and their content cannot be legally read inside Belarus.
As a result of these ongoing violations, hundreds of thousands of people have left Belarus since 2020. This includes lawyers, activists, members of civil society organizations, journalists.
We also observed intensified use of broad counter-terrorism, counter-extremism legislation to restrict civic space.
Belarus has systematically destroyed every independent civil society organization. The mechanism is the same as for journalists. Designate the organization as extremist, criminalize membership, prosecute the leadership. Vyasna, meaning spring, was the oldest and most respected human rights organization in Belarus. Founded in 1996, it documented every political prisoner case in the country for over 20 years. In 2021, it was raided and shut down. Its leader, Ales Bialiatski, was sentenced to 10 years in prison in 2023 on tax evasion charges that international observers called a sham. 3 months later, while still in prison, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Over 1,500 non-governmental organizations have been closed since 2020. The Belarusian Helsinki Committee, the Belarusian PEN Center, Press Club Belarus, Right by Right. All gone, all extremist. Lawyers have been targeted with particular intensity. The Belarus Bar Association was forced to disbar over 100 lawyers who defended political cases. Several were criminally prosecuted simply for representing political detainees. The United Nations group of independent experts has explicitly stated that extremist legislation has been used in prosecuting defense lawyers and actively dismantling the legal profession. Ales Bialiatski remains in prison, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate behind bars in IK9 penal colony in Horky. His deputy Valentin Stefanovic was also sentenced to 9 years. Irina Kalep, journalist and wife of imprisoned opposition leader Andrei Sanikov, lives in exile.
The violations were widespread, systematic, and directed against civilians critical of the government. Many have been arrested multiple times, including immediately after being released for the first time. By changing laws on extremists, prosecuting defense lawyers, and actively placing the Bar Association under the control of the Ministry of Justice.
Belarus has never recognized same-sex relationships. Same-sex marriage and civil partnerships are explicitly excluded under the constitution. But since 2020, the situation has deteriorated sharply. In 2024, Belarus moved toward adopting Russian-style legislation banning gay, lesbian and transgender content as propaganda, expanding administrative and criminal liability. The extremist framework is now used against LGBT support content on social media. Police have raided private gatherings. Searches have been conducted at the homes of people who simply posted rainbow imagery online. Women political prisoners face specific risks. The United Nations has documented systematic medical neglect of women detained on political grounds, denial of basic gynecological care, withholding of medication, and use of detention conditions to inflict psychological harm. Denial of timely medical care is reportedly systematic and deliberate against political prisoners.
Denial of adequate and timely medical care is reportedly systematic and deliberate against political prisoners.
That some violations amount to the crimes against humanity of imprisonment and persecution on political grounds. Those detained in penal colonies have been subjected to a particularly discriminatory treatment designed to punish them. Many have been arrested multiple times, including immediately after being released for the first time.
Gender-based violence inside detention has also been documented. Survivors of the August 2020 crackdown have testified that women detained at a Krestsina detention center in Minsk were subjected to threats of sexual violence, strip searches conducted by male officers, and denial of menstrual hygiene. Krestsina is now a United Nations documented site of mass beatings of detainees in August 2020. Multiple deaths in custody have been linked to denial of medical care. The United Nations describes some of these violations as amounting to the crimes against humanity of imprisonment and torture on political grounds. Belarus's sporting heritage runs deep. Olympic gold medals, world champions in wrestling, gymnastics, ice hockey, athletes celebrated in every village. But since 2020, sport became a battlefield for political loyalty. In August 2020, hundreds of Belarusian athletes signed an open letter against the violence. The response was swift. Many were stripped of state funding, removed from national teams, or threatened with prosecution. Alexandra Herasimenia, three-time Olympic medalist in swimming, world champion, and one of the most decorated athletes in modern Belarusian history, founded the Belarusian Sports Solidarity Foundation in 2020 to support athletes targeted for their civic stance. She was forced to flee Belarus shortly after. In 2023, she was sentenced in absentia to 12 years in prison. She lives in Vilnius, where the foundation continues its work, supporting more than 500 persecuted Belarusian athletes. In July 2021, Tsikhanouskaya, a Belarusian sprinter, refused to board a flight home from the Tokyo Olympics after openly criticizing her coaches. She was granted a humanitarian visa by Poland in less than 24 hours. The world watched a Belarusian athlete defect from her own delegation, live on camera. The Belarusian Olympic Committee is headed by Lukashenko's own son, Viktor. Athletes who refuse to support the regime face the same political articles applied to journalists and protesters. Article 342 for mass disorder, Article 361 for security calls, Article 369.1 for discrediting Belarus. After August 2020, the Belarusian diaspora exploded. Estimates of departed Belarusians range from 300,000 to 500,000 in 5 years, 5% of the country's pre-2020 population. Lithuania, the closest neighbour and main hub of the Belarusian opposition. Recognition rates 80 to 90% for documented political opposition. Vilnius hosts the United Transitional Cabinet. The European Belarus Office, most independent media outlets. Poland, the second largest destination, special humanitarian visa scheme for Belarusians. Recognition rates 70 to 85% for documented activists, journalists, persecuted minorities. Białystok and Warsaw have major Belarusian diaspora hubs. Germany, major European destination. Recognition rates 50 to 70% for political opposition, journalists, gay, lesbian and transgender applicants, military refusers, religious minorities. United Kingdom, successful claims for political opposition, journalists, women in politically targeted families, gay, lesbian and transgender applicants. Recognition rates 40 to 60% with a strong country expert report. United States, active asylum docket for Belarusian opposition and journalists. Recognition rates 40 to 60%. Czech Republic, Latvia, Estonia, Netherlands all receive Belarusian asylum applications with strong recognition rates for documented profiles. And one important warning: Russia, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Armenia, Serbia, these are not safe for Belarusian dissidents. Direct extradition risk is documented. Belarusians have been kidnapped from Moscow airports. Belarusians have disappeared from Yerevan. What these numbers tell you is simple. Belarus is recognized across the democratic world as a country where systematic persecution makes asylum claims credible. The evidence required is rigorous. The recognition is regular. Asylum is granted when the state cannot protect you from a well-founded fear of persecution on one of 5 refugee convention grounds. For Belarus, multiple grounds are routinely engaged. Political opinion, real or imputed. Applies to political opposition, Tsikhanouskaya supporters, post-2020 protesters, journalists, military refusers, anyone who has signed open letters or attended rallies. Religion, unregistered Protestant churches, Jehovah's Witnesses, certain Orthodox or Catholic communities under state pressure. Particular social group, gay, lesbian and transgender Belarusians, journalists, family members of exiled critics, women, political prisoners, disbarred lawyers. Nationality and ethnicity, Belarusian Poles, Lithuanians and others, targeted under forced Russification policies. The biggest question for a Belarusian asylum case is usually not the persecution. It is the question of internal relocation. Courts often ask, Belarus is a relatively small country of 9 million. Can you not just move to a different city? The honest expert witness answer is, Belarus is one of the most surveilled societies in Europe. The KGB operates nationally. Mandatory residence registration is tracked through the Propiska system. The extremist list, the political case database, the criminal records, all federal. The expert witness cannot accept or reject the applicant's testimony. That is the court's role. The expert assesses the applicant's account against the country's situation and provides a detailed conclusion on the risk of return and on the absence of internal relocation options. In most cases, if the claimed information is accepted by the court, internal relocation and return to Belarus are unsafe for these types of persecution, and if the court accepts the applicant's evidence, asylum can be granted in most cases. This is why a personal assessment of each individual case is critically important. Belarus is the homeland of Marc Chagall, of Miran Nesvij castles, of the Białowieża primeval forest, the land of 3-time Olympic medalists, of Nobel laureate writers like Svetlana Alexievich, of one of the most highly educated populations in Europe. None of that is in question. What is in question is the system that rules them. Freedom House rates Belarus as not free, among the lowest scores in Europe. The United Nations group of independent experts has concluded that the violations in Belarus constitute crimes against humanity. Over 1,400 political prisoners remain behind bars. 250 organizations declared extremist. Hundreds of lawyers disbarred for defending political cases. Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya leads the Belarusian opposition from Vilnius. Slava Komissarenko performs from Berlin, Warsaw and Tel Aviv to packed halls. Alexandra Herasimenia runs the Belarusian Sports Solidarity Foundation from Lithuania. Alice Bialyatsky remains in prison, Nobel laureate behind bars. The pattern is the same: silence and prison at home, or freedom and exile abroad. If you are a Belarusian asylum seeker, you need a country expert report that proves your case against the country information. If you are a solicitor, you need an expert who knows the KGB from the GUBAZIK, Article 342 from Article 293, the Agrestina Detention Centre from the IK9 Penal Colony, and the August 2020 crackdown from the quiet repression continuing today. Subscribe to the channel for the next country in our Why People Flee series. Comment below, which country should we cover next? Share this video with anyone who needs it. This is Europe's last dictatorship. We will see you in the next one.